So as people start to trickle on, if you missed this before, you can add your answers to these questions in the Q&A box. Think about something that you like about your neighborhood, something that makes it beautiful, and something that you'd change or is challenging. Location. Very nice.
That comment about location is pretty interesting. When I think about a neighborhood that has good location, it to me means that it's walkable, so I can see family or friends, and I can also get to like a store, for example, like a post office or a school. I'm wondering what else people think are important when it comes to location.
Maybe close to public transit, close to their school or work. Oh, very nice. So close to transit, close to school, close to green space. Sounds like the perfect place. Are there any challenges that you find in your neighborhood? See some more people popping on. So if you missed it before, we're just kind of getting warmed up here. You can answer the questions on the screen. Something that you like about your neighborhood that makes it beautiful, or something that is challenging. You can answer both. So maybe not the cleanest area. Oh yeah, I wish that too. I wish my neighborhood had a garden, a community garden. Someone has a pool. I wish my area had a pool.
Someone's concerned that the dogs are not being cleaned up after properly. That definitely is a challenge in a neighborhood.
So we'll just wait a minute or two more before we get started. For those of you who just are signing on, welcome to day 3 of the Future of Construction. And we're on Eastern Standard Time here in Boston, so we'll just get started at 1 p.m.
If people who are just joining want to answer the questions on the screen, you can type them into the Q&A box. What makes your neighborhood beautiful? What are some things you would like to see different?
We'll wait about 1 more minute Hopefully people trickle on. Well, there's someone who has a lot of activities in their neighborhood and volunteering. So not just the neighborhood is made up of buildings, but it's also made up of people and what people do in those spaces. And if you have community activities, you might have a park nearby, you might have a community center that you go to. These are all really nice answers. For those signing on, we're just getting warmed up, and you can answer the questions on the screen, something you like and something you'd change about your neighborhood. Community garden, really close to school, soccer field, other sports fields. So plenty of places that are close by to where we live. We can get to them easily. We might be able to walk to them, maybe take the train. Very nice.
Lots of community gardens, which is great. I heard a story this morning about how people can use their yards for community gardens, and maybe if you don't want a garden, a neighbor will come over and garden for you. I thought that was sort of neat. So we sort of start to grow food, not just in community gardens, but everywhere.
There's someone that wishes there weren't as many hills, and I totally agree. It's really hard to ride your bike around the city, and I'm assuming you're in Boston, the person that said that comment, but I totally agree. The city is full of hills. Sometimes you get downhill and then you got to go back home uphill. Crowded and traffic. So those are some things we're not seeing right now, which is hopefully a good thing, even though circumstances. Well, you guys can keep answering these if you'd like. And for people just signing on, this is just the warm up for day 3. So welcome to day 3 of the Future of Construction. And just a couple of reminders that you can use the Q&A box to type in your responses throughout this presentation, or you can use the raise your hand occasionally. We'll also be posting something in the chat box, maybe a link or some other information, so you can look there. And if everyone's ready, we'll get started. So thank you guys for all of your really awesome responses. Some of you guys were identifying some challenges that may also be affected by climate change, but that's essentially what we're talking about today. We're going to be discussing the biggest challenges facing all of us, which is climate change. And we'll be learning how design can affect our cities, our neighborhoods, and our buildings, and reduce climate change's impact and allow for us to live a better life, both the communities made up of people and the planet at large. So for the first half, you'll hear from us at the Boston Society for Architecture, and then for the second half, you'll be hearing from EcoRise. So you might be wondering who I am. My name is Taylor Johnson, and I work for the Boston Society for Architecture. I have a background in architecture, and I'm a designer. And currently with the BSA, I work on design education projects and community engagement projects. We also have Polly Carpenter here.
Hello, everybody. My name is Polly Carpenter. I'm an architect for the Boston Society for Architecture, and we are an organization that is the chapter of the American Institute of Architects in Boston. So we're a professional organization of about 4,000 architect members. Plus we're a community nonprofit where we work with children and the public at large to understand design, to think about how design really improves our lives. And the great thing about having architecture is included in this sort of future of construction is because architecture is one of sort of few careers that really combine the arts and the sciences. It's the sort of technical problem solving of engineering and math, but it's also the more sort of human-centered, artistic, aesthetic parts of the building process that sort of bring it all together in a really successful building. So it's just, that's why I became an architect, because I was sort of a fort builder, but, and I love to sort of solve problems, but I also love to draw and I love to build things. So we're really excited to share architecture and design with you. Monday, there's a lot of discussion about great buildings and passive house and some of the sort of techniques that Suffolk is using in their new ways of building buildings. And all of those great buildings were designed by architects. So I hope some of you will get inspired by architecture and design and think about that as a career field.
Very nice. So today we're going to talk about all about design. And we want you to be able to take away some things at the end of this. We want you to be able to understand the city's challenges of climate change and to identify how design choices can help to reduce those challenges, and to discover how big and small design choices that happen in the built environment, which is just a fancy word for saying, you know, the spaces all around us, can have a large positive impact. So some of the challenges you have already identified in your neighborhoods are effects of climate change. And these challenges are not only happening in our neighborhoods, but across the region. And the city has been spending the past several years doing research on what is coming, planning for that, and designing solutions to those challenges. We'll be looking at these challenges and solutions from a couple different scales today, starting from something as big as a city, and we'll be zooming in to smaller and smaller as we go along. So most of you know that this is Boston today, and some of you Bostonians might recognize your neighborhood here on the map, and if you want, you can type that into the Q&A box where you're from. And these are the challenges facing Boston in the future. So some of these are some of the largest effects of climate change. There's extreme heat, flooding, and coastal storms. And although this may look like a lot of the city is affected, and it is, we really hope to create like a hopeful approach today and understand how design can help reduce these challenges. So we'll start with storm surge. And because Boston is surrounded on most sides by water, sea level rise is one of the first things that this city researched. This map shows areas of Boston that will flood in the next 100 years, but it may also flood up to 2 times a day depending on high tides. Rising seas and more powerful storms cause heavier rainfall in shorter periods of time. And with fewer places for this water to go, many of those low-lying roads and areas will start to flood more frequently. Some of you may have noticed already flooding as you walk, bike, or ride around the city. And you might be wondering what all this is, what all this red is. So the darker the red, the hotter the area is. And although we do have a lot of parks and green spaces in our city is also like a lot of other cities, which it's made up of asphalt, concrete, and other surfaces that trap the heat and make it even hotter. And excessive heat is one of the biggest problems caused by global warming because it leads to droughts and fires and uncomfortable living conditions. But, you know, not to fret, there's plenty of things we can do about all these things. So over the last several years, the city of Boston has started to make plans to make our city more resilient to the challenges caused by climate change. And in this effort, there are landscape architects, engineers, and other designers who are all working together to reimagine our shorelines, our city, and all the buildings that make our city. Designers also need to think about not only how to solve for climate change, but they also want to design to reverse climate change. And in the next several slides, you'll start to see how designers are doing just that. Maybe they're focusing on flooding, or they're focusing on how to reduce global warming overall. So you might not know this, but one of the biggest causes of global warming is an excess of carbon in our atmosphere. And buildings are some of the biggest carbon emitters. So they're really what we should focus on. Boston's buildings account for about 71% of carbon emissions through energy use and construction. And with many buildings to repair and build anew over the next several years, the city has a new set of standards so that in the next 10 years, buildings will have to lower the amount of carbon emissions that they emit into the atmosphere. Our neighborhoods, like many of you mentioned before, are made up of buildings, parks, and infrastructure like roads, bridges, sidewalks. And the way we design our neighborhoods can help lessen the effects of climate change while also making them healthier and more beautiful places to live. So go ahead and type into the Q&A box what you see here in this image. What are some of those features in this neighborhood design that are helping to tackle climate change?
So I see no cars. People are seeing solar panels, water at the edge of the neighborhood. People are noticing trees. Definitely noticing the water. And someone notices that it looks very clean. The air looks really clean. That's pretty good.
Very nice.
Green buildings. Stairs so that the water can rise without damaging property. That's a pretty good observation. Rowboats instead of electric boats. Really great answers. Clean water. Mm-hmm.
So you guys sound like you know what you're talking about. I see a lot of those things too, and you might not recognize this neighborhood at all. And it's because it's a design proposal by a local architecture firm called Architecture. And it's for a waterfront neighborhood downtown. And with many of their design choices that you see here, they are trying to address some of the challenges that we were just talking about. So in this neighborhood, I see green spaces that help to protect the buildings around it from flooding, while also decreasing heat in the whole area, and it helps to absorb, shade, and cool down the neighborhood. There's a step shoreline that allows for higher tides to rise up slowly and for the water to be absorbed into the grass, and it protects the buildings around it. Access to the water is really important, so for people to be able to get places by foot, bike, or public transit rather than having to rely on a car. And even the buildings themselves do this as well. So they have space for ventilation, which means air can pass through them and cool them down. And you can see that through the cutout throughout the buildings, and then plenty of space below the roof. Those roofs, they probably look a lot different than the roofs in your neighborhood. They definitely look like different from mine. But they are solar roofs, and they provide shading for the building with that big canopy. But the white color also helps to bounce off heat and cool them down. On top of the roof, there's also solar panels, which help collect energy from the sun to reduce the amount of energy that the building has to use overall. So as we're zooming in from the city to the neighborhood scale, we can now zoom in even further to the building scale. And the same design choices that happen at the neighborhood scale happen to make better buildings that have lower carbon emissions and a more positive impact on the environment. So designers have many different tools in their tool belt that they can use to make their designs low impact. They can decrease the effects of extreme heat by using ventilation, which means that they can bring in air, which helps to cool the building down. They can orient or turn the building and position the windows and doors in certain spots to allow for more air to flow in and cool the building down. And they can use plants and greenery, which help to shade the buildings and the outdoor spaces as well. And they create cooler climates around with cool, fresh air. To make sure the buildings are safe from flooding and don't flood others, designers can use landscape techniques such as step landscapes or step shorelines, which help to manage water. they can elevate buildings away from the water, or within the buildings, they can relocate the building services, which means that the boiler and the mechanicals that help run the building, those are moved up so that they're not flooded on the lower levels. And lastly, they can also reduce energy. And one of the ways to reduce energy is by producing your own. So you can produce your own with solar panels, geothermal, or wind. And you can also use building orientation and turn the building so it's oriented towards the sun. You can also use material choices that will create an energy efficient exterior. So there's really a lot of things you can do to help lower buildings' impact. So like we did before, go ahead and type into the Q&A box what you see here. What features of this building stick out to you that might help tackle climate change?
So people are seeing the green wall, they're seeing trees, greenery, something on the roof. Yeah, so I think I see that too. Open space, clean air.
These are all really good answers.
Park. Solar panels, wind power, water. It's great.
Very nice. Looks like you guys can do my job for me. So this building is a design proposal. So it's another building that doesn't exist, but hopefully exists in the future. And it's done by another local architecture firm, Lab Architects. And like all you guys started to observe, I see living walls, which help to cool the building down and purify the air around it. And you'll be learning a lot more about living walls and how they really work from EcoRise later on today. There is a large ventilation stack within the building, which helps to allow air to flow through and cool the building down. There's a lot of different material choices, from brick to greenery to glass. The brick on the south side has less openings, which that's the side that will absorb the most sun. And then there's glass windows that face the east. So the way you choose materials for a building helps to regulate the temperature of the building. And you can see that it faces east, so the sun will wrap around it. And in the landscape around the building, they're using a lot of elements that we saw at the neighborhood scale. So there's green space, which helps absorb heat, but it may also absorb water if the water gets high enough, and a stepped shoreline to help deal with that water rising. The building uses many design choices that are not only for looks, but they're for function, and they help lower the building's impact on the environment. So there's a rainwater collecting roof, which if you see down at the bottom, there's those blue storage tanks, so the water is stored there and used for other things. There's canopies and overhangs on the building to help shade it. There's ventilation. There's plenty of ventilation both through the middle of the building and through the units as well, which help to create better airflow in the building. And then back on the roof, they're using the sun with solar panels to help gain their own energy. And you might see these micro units stacked on top of each other and wonder what those are. So micro units are a smaller way to live. They are smaller units where people can do many different things within a couple of spaces. And micro units are another way to reduce energy because people have just enough space to live comfortably. When people use less space for housing, it frees up the city to allow for more open spaces, shared public parks, and other things that make our neighborhoods really great. And even a small unit of housing can do the same things that design has been doing at the city, the neighborhood, and the building scales. These micro units allow for living in less space, which means less materials and energy used. And everything within the unit has a purpose and a function so that nothing's wasted. So micro units are designed in many different ways. Some are within other buildings like the one we saw, others stand alone, and some have more than one level. This particular example from Architecture shows this one level design. And there's a balcony of green space, which helps to absorb the sun and cool the building down, as well as purifying the air for the unit. Having openings on both sides of the unit, which many of our homes don't have, that allows for fresh air to flow through and provide ventilation. And then the space within it, that provides many different functions in one. So someone who lives here might use this space for relaxing, cooking, working, or sleeping. And being in one space and having less rooms cuts down on the amount of electricity used and the amount of energy used overall. So raise your hand. You can use the button below if you see yourself living in a space like this, maybe in the future. If you could, I do see some hands being raised.
And I wonder if anyone can say that there's another name for a micro housing unit that actually is freestanding, meaning it's not part of another building, it's just a separate building. Does anyone know the other, like what sort of another term for that little building? Anyone know what that's called?
Well, lots of people are raising their hand.
I'm glad, that's great. So it's your own little tiny house. That's exactly what a tiny house is a micro housing unit.
Terrific. And people keep raising their hands. So a lot of people might be living in these in the future. And I know I would definitely be interested in living in a space like this. And hopefully we'll see more built around the city as the years go on. And lastly, this is a view of what these architects imagined a building of micro units could be. So it looks like a really beautiful place, a place with plenty of public space to roam around. There's greenery and fresh air. So hopefully this is a great picture into the future. And we've covered many different scales of design in this short time here today, from as big as the city to as small as a micro unit. But hopefully you've learned that they're all designed the same way. They're designed using the same tools, and those can help lessen the impacts of climate change on us and have a more positive impact on the environment at large. And we also hope that you learned something new about design today that you might want to include in your Make It Green design projects later this week. And lastly, before we let you go, we just wanted to let you know that we are dropping a link over in the chat. I think Polly will drop it in, of our micro unit design worksheet for those of you who are interested in making your own. And based on how many hands raised, I think a lot of people might want to design their own this week, and you may include some of the things that you learn or make in your Make It Green project. So lastly, I just want to say thank you very much for having me today. And with that, I'll turn it over to EcoRise, who will be zooming in even further to talk about design at the smallest scale yet, which is the design of a wall, and specifically a living wall. So
I also dropped a few, just a few links in the chat with our website with some more resources and information, and then Taylor and my email addresses. If anyone has more questions about architecture and design, please reach out to us.
Perfect. I hope to hear from some of you soon. So I'm going to turn it over to Zakia.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to get my screen all set up for you guys, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that living wall that you have most likely have heard a lot about on Monday. I know that Kellyanne mentioned it. I know that a few folks from Suffolk mentioned it. So we're going to go in depth a little bit about our living wall. So who am I? I am Zakia Grant. I am an educator with EcoRise for the Sustainable Intelligence Program. My background is in geology, so I actually spent some time looking at rocks and soil, and most importantly, water. I'm so passionate about water and how we can make sure that we keep it clean and in the spaces that water should be in and not in our homes, like we learned about in Polly and Taylor's presentation. And
Hello, everybody. My name is Gamal Sharif. I've been a middle school science teacher, and I also taught environmental science at the high school level. I'm really passionate about beautiful schools that conserve energy and water, that are fun to be in, that have lots of green space and places to ride bicycles. And I'm looking forward to hearing your comments today about the living walls that can make either your school or your community more beautiful and more energy efficient.
okay, so we have some questions for today that we're going to address. So we're going to talk about what a living wall actually is. And I know that throughout the different presentations over the week, you might have touched upon what they are and seen some great images about what they are. We're going to talk about how constructing a living wall can impact our climate change in our local community, and what do we need to actually construct that living wall. And there's lots of different designs out there. There's no one way to build it. So we'll take a look at what things we need to design it, and what purposes do we want it for. So we're going to be asking some questions. So we want you to put those answers in the Q&A box. But if you have your own questions that you would like to ask during the presentation, go ahead and drop those in there as well. So let's just take a look at these two images, and I'll give you maybe about 30 seconds to look at the two images so we can kind of come up with an idea of what we believe or think a living wall is. So I made sure that I put two different types of images there. You can focus on what's in the background, where they're located, what's kind of like in those living walls. So are we getting any great answers?
Well, I think starting big, it looks like we can be inside or outside. And that's one nice thing about an inside, that's a surprise. And we do have some questions about like how you actually get water to these plants. So we're going to be addressing that soon.
Okay, so one of the biggest things is that you can have a living wall inside or outside. And so for a lot of the images that you've seen over the past couple of days, you've had pictures of or images of living walls on the outside of buildings. And that serves a very important purpose. But you can also have those living walls inside buildings and also inside your home. And we'll see that they don't have to be as elaborate. They can be very, very simple. And they can be things that you can design for your own home or for your own local community. So how can living walls reduce air pollution and save water and reduce runoff? So let's talk about these two things right now. So we know that plants are important. Plants help us breathe better. That's why they always advocate for having trees around. But when you can't have trees around, or if there's no forest nearby, living walls can be a great alternative. Plants can filter the air from particles such as car exhaust, and make it easier for us to breathe. Those particles also impact climate change. So you know that we can have these plants positively impact our communities. They can also save water and reduce runoff. So raise your hand if you know what runoff is. Okay, so we're getting a few people raising their hands saying they know what runoff is. Now, runoff is when water hits the ground, and especially important when you have water hitting a paved surface like we have in our urban areas. That water will collect everything that's on that paved area as it moves to either a sewer or to a body of water. So things that could be on the ground are oil from cars that have oil leaks, particles from vehicle exhaust, if people don't pick up after their pets, you know, that's on the street as well. And that can all run into our nearest bodies of water and have a negative impact on water quality. So what a living wall can do is to prevent some of that extra water that would normally get into our drainage system or run off into our bodies of water. They can collect that water and use it for our plants to grow and have all those positive benefits. Now, Taylor talked a lot about buildings and building surfaces and how buildings can use a lot of energy. Now, raise your hand if you've ever walked on hot pavement in the summer. A few people, okay? So that pavement is pretty hot. Now, different materials that are similar to street pavement or sidewalks, those materials are used in making buildings as well. And so the sides of our buildings can be very hot, and that means that to cool them down on the inside requires a lot of energy. So if we can have our living walls kind of substitute for that hot building surface, then we don't need as much energy to cool the building down inside. And we can also make our buildings or our local areas look cool with our cool designs that we construct. Is there any questions before we move on to our wonderful living wall example designs? Is there any questions coming in, Gamal, that we need to address?
Yeah, one of the questions is coming from a person who's interested in weather and climate. Like, for example, in Boston, there might be weather or climate that's different from other parts of the country. What advice would you have about picking plants that could survive in your area?
That is a very good question. And this is where you as a designer comes in. You may want to choose plants that stay green for a longer period of time that could survive the harsh winter. You may want to choose plants that maybe when they go dormant during the winter, they don't look as bad, but they really perk up in the spring. So plant choice, as you'll see in a few minutes, is really, really important when you design your living wall. But that is up to you as the designer. So we're going to see some examples, and we'll get more into that when we talk about designing. So we're going to go through these slides very quickly. And if you want to answer the question, you can pop it in Q&A. But what kinds of designs or patterns do you see in this picture here? And so it really depends on the plants, the different plants that are used, and the arrangement or the placement of the plants. So if you say that you see some kind of wavy stripe of different colors, you know, give yourself a high five, okay? So this designer used some red plants and some peach plants and place them in a way that will get that wavy stripe. Now, we've been seeing some great images of living walls that are very, very fancy, but a living wall could be very, very simple. And it could be as simple as attaching plants to a regular chain link fence, and that would be considered a living wall. And so that's very low key, something that you don't need a lot of tools for. And in this image, we just have some potted plants hanging on a chain link fence. How could we attach the plants to a brick wall? Now, we may have a building that already exists and we want to add that benefit of having a living wall in our local community. So that brick wall could be part of a school, it could be part of a store in our neighborhood. And so when we talk about adding something to an existing building, we have to think about the infrastructure. So does anybody have any ideas how we can put these things into a brick wall?
Someone says that they would like to drill it in, and
Okay.
that could be one way to do it.
So you can drill it in. And now remember, we have to be mindful of keeping the integrity of the wall. So we have to figure out, you know, what size hole can we drill into the brick wall without creating all sorts of different cracks that would make the wall not as sturdy. So, but obviously it can be done. And so it just takes a little bit of research in order to figure out the best way to do it.
Someone said that they would like to use some kind of Velcro or tape to attach the garden portion to the wall. And someone said also you have to be careful with drywall. So I'm wondering if you could tell us what drywall is.
Okay, so drywall is the material that you find on the inside of homes. So we're going to talk a little bit about how drywall can be impacted by a living wall. We don't want drywall to get wet. That's why it's part of the reason why it's called drywall. And so you do have to protect it from moisture. And you do need moisture in order to keep your plants alive on your living walls, as with any type of plant. So when we talk about how to construct it, we'll get a little bit more into the materials that are needed. And then lastly, what kind of food can we grow on living walls? So we've seen images of all these different plants, but these are plants too. But this living wall has a different purpose. We can actually grow food on our living wall. Does anybody know what these plants are? So, do we have any guesses?
Yeah, it looks like we have a guess for cabbage, one for lettuce, salad for sure. I like those are big parts of my salad. Scallions, broccoli and cabbage. Wow. And a Venus flytrap. That would be fun.
So if you said lettuce, definitely these are different varieties of lettuce on here. But some of the other suggestions are things that we could grow on our living wall. So it doesn't have to be just flowers and other non-edible plants.
You know, these plants that we're looking at right now probably grow in the spring or in the fall, and maybe a little bit during the summer, because these plants like cool weather. And when it gets really cold, these plants wouldn't really survive. So you would have a wall with gray tubes. What do you think, Zakia, we could do, or I'm wondering what the students think, what could we do when those plants aren't growing? What could we put in there instead?
That's a very good question. You can choose plants, again, that stay green all year. Or, let's see, does anybody else have an idea what you can put in there to keep our living wall looking beautiful in the neighborhood during the time?
One person said kale would be great. Kale is a type of plant that it's a big leaf. It's a big leaf, and it's really tasty, and you can eat it once you cook it, because it's kind of tough otherwise. And that kale can really get down into low temperatures. So even there are types of food that can grow under very low temperatures. And
that's
I don't think there's any other heat resistant or cold resistant plants. So to do a little research on that. Another person said evergreen plants, which is a very specific type of plant that you mentioned before.
And so we're going to talk a little bit more about the idea of really looking into how what type of plants should be in there and who actually has a career in that. So how can we construct a living wall? And there are many different ways to do this. And these three systems here are not the only systems because we saw some examples previously that are very, very simple, and some of them are even more complex than this. So on the left-hand side, we have the modular system. And if you don't know what modular means, it means pieces. So these are pieces that you can rearrange depending on the look that you want or the type of material that you have. But most importantly, you have in red your wall and then some waterproofing. Okay, and so there was a question about drywall, whether this is indoor or outdoor, but especially indoor, you want to make sure that your water is not touching your drywall because that can result in mold or the integrity of the wall deteriorating, meaning that your wall can fall down if it gets too wet. So you want to have that waterproofing on the back of your structure, and then you can put your modules, which will contain your plants. And your blue will be your irrigation. For the hydroponic system, if you're not sure what hydroponic means, it means that you're really just dealing with water and not soil as your growing medium. And so again, you still need your waterproof backing if you want to attach it to a wall. And then the last one, there's no kind of backing to a wall. This could be freestanding. This could be something like that first picture that we saw. It maybe not be a cable and wire, but that was a pallet. But you can have this kind of like cable wire system, and you just put the plants in their growing medium in there. And I'm mentioning the word growing medium. We're going to talk about that in the very next slide. Okay. And then this might have to be handled. Okay. And that's totally fine. So I'm going to take a second to think about, when we're trying to construct our living wall, what career fields can be associated with constructing living walls? And so we mentioned about, needing specific plants. We talked about integrity of structures. And if you can't name the name of the exact type of person, you can give a description.
Well, one thing that we're seeing is that a gardener would be involved, or a landscape architect. And even people who are masons who work with brick and cement should know about this. People who work with wood might be called carpenters. And when you think about people who put everything together, the plants and the material, like the growing apparatus, maybe an architect would have to know about how all the different materials work together.
And I'm going to add one more person, because there's been a lot of talk about what plants we should use. Besides a gardener, we can also use a horticulturist. Okay, we can use interior designers too, if we want a special look to our building, our living wall. So we had one where we're using different color flowers for to create a pattern. So the horticulturist and the interior designer may want to get together and figure out how they're going to make our living wall important to climate change, but also very beautiful. Okay, so growing media. I've been talking a little bit about that. And I mentioned an important growing media, but it is any material in which a plant's roots can take hold and from which the plant can absorb water and nutrients. So there's probably one obvious example of growing media. Does anybody know? You place it in that Q&A. And if you have other examples of growing media, because there is more than one.
Okay, when we look at this wall, there's a couple of different things that are happening. So we can see that there are flowers, and those are white and green and yellow. There's also soil that the plants grow in. So I'm wondering, what else do you think should be in here? Why don't you answer in the Q&A box and tell us, what kinds of things do you need for a wall, or what are the specific things that plants need to grow in?
So I see that one person mentioned soil, and that's very, very important. That's the most obvious growing media that, that plants can grow in. And that's where we see our trees or grass and everything in nature. But when we look at maybe different types of gardens, there are other things that plants can grow in that don't require soil. So if you are saying things like, I see water, that's great. And if you look at this picture here, it's actually felt. Okay, so I mentioned that in the constructing a living wall diagram. So this is special gardening felt that just needs a little bit of water to stay moist, and that moisture is enough to keep the plant's roots moist. So you don't necessarily need soil, and that's great because sometimes the soil, when it gets wet, it can make our wall a little bit too heavy, and then our wall can topple over. So we've been talking a lot about plants. A lot of you guys have asked about what types of plants should we use. So there are important questions that we need to think about when we're deciding what plants to use. Will our plants survive the conditions? Just like someone asked, it gets very cold. What plants, are going to still look nice or survive during the winter time? Will it weigh too much for a wall? Will the plants on the living wall need lots of care? So do we want plants that need water, that constantly need water, or do we want things that are a little bit more resilient, a little bit more drought tolerant, so they don't need as much water? And will you use it to grow food? So will this living wall be a living wall garden? And those are all very important questions that you have to decide when you decide to design your living wall. Now, moisture. Our plants need moisture. So how will they receive water? Now, in this diagram, we have water in the system, okay? And now getting water into the system, that can be how you decide in your design, but there's water in this system and it's going to circulate throughout the system. So it goes into the plants absorb what they need, whatever else is not needed will collect in the bottom at the reservoir, and then that extra water will be recirculated via a pump. Okay, so that's the example for this diagram for this specific type of system. But where else can we get water, or how else can we design our living wall to get water? Especially if maybe we don't want to use a pump, or do we have any ideas?
Someone said that if you can capture rain, that would be a good start. And that reminds me of what Taylor and Polly were talking about. If there was a building and you could capture the rain from the top, you might be able to bring it down into your walls.
Okay, very good. So so collecting water, you can use rain barrels. You can even use water that has been used in the building before, depending on what it's been used for. So the idea of once you've maybe washed your dishes, you can use that water instead of having it going into the drainage system or into the sewers. You can use it one more time to water these plants that will help filter the air. And then any water that's left over can be recirculated or then finally go into the system. So using things like what we call gray water. All right, you guys are doing a great job. And so if you want to work on designing your own living wall, we have some materials that can help you think about the design that you would like to achieve. And we have a worksheet called Design a Living Wall. And you should see that link being popped into the chat, and you'll be able to access that. And then if you want an example of a really cool living wall that you can design, we have some directions on that, on a specific living wall that is very simple, doesn't require a lot of electronics or a pump. This is going to be a hand-watered system, and it can use some things that you might be able to find around your house. So this one uses an old dresser drawer, okay? So, and a couple of other materials, and you can put special plants in there. You can choose your own plants. And so that is our hanging garden activity. And the link should be in the chat for that right now. So using both of the presentations for today, we would love for you guys to design something excellent. And we have a cool down prompt. And we can also do some Q&A during this time. Well, what will your living wall look like? So there's some things that you need to think about before you start sketching what it's going to look like. What's the purpose of your living wall? Are you going to grow food in it? Are you going to use it for making the neighborhood look nice? Okay, where will it be? Will it be in a backyard? Will it be on the side of a building? Will it be downtown, right? What will it look like? Do you want a pattern in it? Do you want it just to be a stretch of green? And so once you think about all of those things, make a quick sketch. So if you have any questions at this time, you can go ahead and ask.
Oh, it turns out that one of the links doesn't work, so I'm going to repost that in the chat box in a moment, okay?
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Any other questions? Oh, someone says mine would have pretty flowers for decoration.
I wonder if people have thoughts about how some of the designs that you saw today could help guide you towards the big activity about environmental justice in your neighborhood or solving for climate change on Thompson Island. Any ideas percolating for that? And yes, plants that need little water are called succulents. I have one that I haven't watered in years. It's still alive. It's amazing. They use those on green roofs quite a bit because they are so hardy.
We managed to kill a succulent that that we got around Christmas time already. So, but succulents are hardy, and that would be, a good way of thinking about. I know that there was a question about, what types of plants are good for different climates. So succulents maybe wouldn't do so well outdoors, but indoors it would be a great alternative for those of us who are not as gifted in gardening. Also wondering, so this is Kellyanne from Autodesk. I'm wondering if anybody has any questions about the design challenge. Tomorrow we're going to dig more deeply into the 2 design challenges. So we're going to hear from the Children's Museum in Boston. We're also going to hear from Thompson's Island Outward Bound. But if anybody has any questions about thinking about how we could link everything that we've learned so far into the design challenges, maybe there's like a way of integrating robotics into your living wall. Thinking about yesterday what Khalif had said about, when you're thinking about designing a robot, you don't necessarily need to think about a really complex task for it to do. It could be something that's just sort of dull and repetitive that you might want to automate. For me, I'm thinking as a killer of succulent plants, maybe I could use a robot to help automate my systems.
Or if you want to put a living wall somewhere where where the living wall can't necessarily access water, so using some type of robotic arm to kind of reach into some place where it can access water and bringing it back to the living wall system, the irrigation system.
One of our students is having a little trouble getting into the website. So Zakia and I will be hanging out afterwards to help you log on, or you should talk to your teacher and he or she will help you get onto the website because it should be accessible to everybody.
Yes, so I'm not sure. We'll troubleshoot those links. I I was troubleshooting them yesterday and I did it again today, so they should work. But you can always email us at support@EcoRise, or you can check out our website, ecorise.org. And Boston Public School teachers, if you want to sign up for our Total Sustainable Intelligence program, you can hang out and I'll give you some directions in order to do that. And so you'll definitely have access to the full lesson plan and student worksheets for those 2 lessons.
I'm also noticing in the question and answer that it's someone's birthday today. So happy birthday, Sophie. Tell me if I pronounced it correctly. Got some beautiful weather for your birthday. I got that big storm that happened on my birthday. That was a few weeks ago in the Northeast. I think in the South too.
So we're going to hang out a little bit more for some question and answers, but we do want to remind you that there's more. Tomorrow, you can use the same link as today from your registration email, and you'll be hearing from some folks talking about designing for resiliency. Kellyanne, did you have anything more to add to that?
So just tomorrow, it's going to be lots of fun as it has been all week. So we are super excited to have the Children's Museum. I don't want to give too much away because you need to tune in tomorrow for the live session, but the Boston Children's Museum is going to be talking about some exciting construction projects that are happening around the Boston Children's Museum, and then thinking about, how we can bring nature to other parts of the city. So really specifically talking about some neighborhoods in Boston. Also, we're going to hear from Thompson Island Outward Bound, and they are going to tell us about some problems that they are facing at Thompson Island, because they think that you middle schoolers would be really great at crowdsourcing some solutions for them. So tomorrow will be super fun. And then on Friday, we are also going to be digging a little bit more deeply into Tinkercad and actually tinkering together and in trying out designing some stuff, and also thinking about design thinking as well. So design thinking is a concept that is really essential to the project that you're going to be doing with your teacher the next couple of weeks. I know that I feel very privileged to have access to architects like Polly and Taylor to ask questions, because I really do think that architectural skills are a superpower. My daughter is 11, so she's in middle school too. And I'm always encouraging her because she really likes art, and how cool would it be to combine your art skills with your math and your science skills to build things. Like, because when you're an architect, you're actually making something that it's not going to go away. It's something that's going to be around for, generations. Your great grandchildren could see something that you built, and how cool is that? So I would encourage you all to take advantage of the opportunity of asking questions to some of our illustrious panelists today, like Polly and Taylor and Gamal and Zakia.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, you're talking about, buildings will be around for a long time. They also just perform so many different jobs, right? They house us, they give us places to do things. They also can help reduce climate change and fight global warming. And, they are also beautiful. So there's so many aspects of a building and of architecture and design that all works together to create, beautiful spaces and neighborhoods. So I do hope some of you will tackle some of these bigger projects, maybe with robotics too.
I wonder if participants could let us know by raising your hands. Do you like to draw? Is drawing something that you like to do? It was one of my favorite things that I would do when I was in school, to the dismay of some of my teachers, because I wasn't always paying attention in middle school. I was often drawing a lot. Raise your hand if you like to draw. And I'm seeing a lot of raised hands. Polly and Taylor, did you like to draw? Like when you were growing up, was that something that got you into architecture? Did you get in trouble in class for drawing?
Taylor, go ahead.
I still draw, so I think it's a great way to flesh out your ideas or just to pass the time. But I hope you guys, whether you like drawing or not, I hope you give it a try once you do your design challenge. There's a question about the living walls. It says, can you use herbs like parsley, cilantro, and oregano for a living wall? So.
You
Zakia,
definitely
you're
can.
muted.
In that first example where I had you all look at the differences between an indoor living wall and an outdoor living wall, it did look like there were herbs in that one. So that's a really kind of easy way to kind of get plants into your home. And if you don't have space to put them on like a surface, you can put them on the wall, and that's extra space that you can use to put that patch of green that you can look at. So herbs are a great way to start on a basic living wall. And they don't take that much to grow as well.
We like oregano because oregano, at least around here, we live right near Boston, and our oregano starts coming up even like before the last frost. So that's a really hardy herb to plant in the Northeast.
Mint too, right? Mint will take over your entire garden if you let it.
It's so funny to see some of the humor come up in the comments. Someone said that they're going to eat the wall if they're not careful.
Well, yesterday they're asking if robots could eat buildings, and Khalif was trying to downplay the apocalyptic theme in some of the comments yesterday. But.
So I just tested those links again. They're popping up for me. So they should be able to, you should be able to access them. So just make sure that you are copying them correctly. If you're typing them in, please make sure that you're typing them in with the proper dashes and capital and small case letters. It is case sensitive. But I'm gonna pop my email in just in case you have any questions.
Also, someone was asking, a teacher is actually asking about seeing the design challenges again. So I will share my screen. Might look a little messy for a second. And then show you the design challenges again. So you can see my screen now? Yes. Zakia, you can see my screen right now, right?
Yes.
Cool. So these are the two design challenges that we're going to dig deep into tomorrow. So particularly, Melissa is going to talk about the issue of environmental justice. So in thinking about climate change, we know that climate change impacts different communities in different ways. So she's really going to get specific about environmental justice and how we can enact environmental justice in our own communities. So you will have two choices in terms of the design prompts that you want to address. So this is the first one. So create a model that shows how you would address an issue of environmental justice in your neighborhood or community, and explain how your design solves this problem through images, words, numbers, a 3D digital model, and or a physical model. So in thinking about a model, sometimes we think of it as a really technical term, but it really just is a way of representing your knowledge and the ideas that you're trying to convey in more than one dimension. So images could count, words could count. I know that my math teacher friends would be excited for me to also include numbers, because informational models are primarily a lot of them are numbers. I will show you on Friday how to use Tinkercad to make a 3D digital model. But you also might even think about how you could build your model in, recyclables like cardboard boxes or cereal boxes or empty cartons. So you could do that by also taking a picture of your physical model and sharing that with us. Melissa is also going to go over from the Children's Museum tomorrow how teachers can submit their students' work for the virtual exhibit by the Children's Museum. So I know when I was growing up, the Children's Museum was like a place that I always loved to go and really, admired. It's like a local landmark. So to think about how you could share your ideas through the Boston Children's Museum is going to be super awesome. The other option that you have is to create a model that shows how you would solve a problem that Thompson Island is facing. So you might be thinking already about the constraints of designing something for an island. They're going to get really specific into situations, and they even already started to crowdsource some problems from students at the King School who've actually visited Thompson Island before. So they will be integrating students' ideas into their presentation tomorrow. So if you're a student at the King School, shout out to you. Tomorrow we're going to be addressing some of the ideas that you have. So thank you for contributing those ideas. And you will show your ideas in the same way. So that is what's up for the design challenges. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So any more questions before we wrap up for today? Anything else you've seen come in, Gamal?
Oh,
Glad we got to JB's comment. JB asked about the next steps. Good to see you, Mr. JB.
All right, so if there aren't any more questions, we are very excited to see you tomorrow.
Oh, I'm sorry, wait a minute.
Oops, are there more questions, Gamal? We're happy to
Yeah, it
hang
just
out.
turned out, someone asked about where the recordings are going to be posted. And I think you mentioned the Children's Museum. Could you say it one more time, please?
Sure, I think I actually have the tab somewhere on my screen. So I'll show you where it will be. The recordings aren't there yet. So we are recording this every day. So this is where it will exist. You guys can see my screen now? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah.
So this is where it will exist, and the URL is Boston Children's Museum. So www.bostonchildrensmuseum.org. And then there is a / future of construction, all one word. We will show this again tomorrow. And again, this is what the page will look like, but it's not going to be updated until next week. So Melissa will share this again tomorrow. I do believe that the form that teachers are going to use to submit student work will also live at the same page, so you don't have to go to different places to submit things. I think this is also where the virtual exhibit will live. So I hope that answers your question. And tomorrow we will be sharing the URL again.
And people are really interested in your sweatshirt, Kellyanne.
So well, a lot of Boston Public Schools teachers have these sweatshirts too, who have participated in our teacher externship. I'm not wearing my pajamas underneath this sweatshirt either, because I was totally ready to be on the screen today. Thank you, though. A lot of BPS students have Tinkercad t-shirts, but the teachers get the sweatshirts. Some principals have them too. Oh, and thank you, Gamal, for sending the link out to everyone. Anything else? Any burning questions before we go? All right, well, I would just like to thank EcoRise and the Boston Society for Architecture today for joining us along this journey, and also just for their willingness to stay in touch with you all as you embark upon your design challenge that we're going to dig into tomorrow and Friday. I'm so excited to see what you create as a result of all these awesome learning experiences, and I hope that you will join us tomorrow and continue to be so creative and so engaging as we think about the future of construction together. So thank you so much. We're going to sign off for today. Awesome job, everybody who presented today. Hopefully we'll keep that energy going tomorrow. So thank you so much. Take care, everyone. It's a beautiful day out in Boston, so you might want to go outside and take in the nature. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place. Might wear the same sweatshirt. All right, take care. Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.